So Chris, thank you for sitting down with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Mitch.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you used to be on the select board in Dennis.
Sure.
And-
As of last Friday, I came off the board. We had the town of Dennis had its municipal elections. I was dual-hatted only because I didn't want the town to have to undergo a special election to fill my select board seat. I didn't want them to have to bear the expense or the logistics of having a special election. So I was dual-hatted until last Friday since they had the special election. And so I'm a state representative for the 1st Barnstable District, which encompasses the towns of Dennis, Brewster, and most of Yarmouth, with the exceptions of West Yarmouth precincts 5 and 6.
Okay. And what have you been up to so far this year for the towns of Dennis and most of Yarmouth?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So I feel like I've only been in the role for about 4 months now, but I feel like I've really hit the ground running. So a few things. One that comes to mind most recently, as you may know, the DY School District had its ribbon cutting for the new middle school, which was a fantastic event. And we invited myself and Senator Sear and Rep. Kip Diggs invited the MSBA, the Mass School Building Authority director, to join us after the ribbon cutting to the Marguerite E. Small Elementary School in Yarmouth. And we did that because that school in particular, although they provide phenomenal instruction, for that school in particular, it's got a diversity of needs. It's very diverse from a socioeconomic perspective, and really the school itself is in deplorable shape. And so we brought the MSBA director, Mr. McCarthy, to tour the school to kind of show him why it's in such need of replacement. And it's actually taken us, when I say us, I mean the school district and state representatives, about almost 11 years to get to this point. It's been, the request has been out there since 2009. And so we, without any formal invitation to apply yet, we did get a verbal that the school would likely be invited to apply, which is the furthest we've gotten thus far. And then in addition to that, in Yarmouth, for instance, as you may know, several Yarmouth residents were victims of a company called Solar Wolf, which was a state-run program that partnered with the town of Yarmouth to undergo what was called Solarize Yarmouth. And that company took people's money and then filed for bankruptcy. And what happened with that is they were supposed to, through the Solarize Yarmouth program, supposed to give people and install solar panels to make their homes more energy efficient. And so I've been working with the Department of Energy and Environmental Affairs to help these victims in Yarmouth actually get solar panels the way they were promised. And then a few other things. Wastewater is a big issue, particularly in Dennis and Yarmouth. I'm very proud of the town of Yarmouth for going for the major borrowing in its passage at the Yarmouth town meeting a few weeks ago. And I know that not only is it going to have long-lasting impacts for the district in terms of environmental protection and also housing development, but in addition to that, what's going to be critical is getting as much funding both from the federal and state levels of government. And so that's really top of mind, not just for myself, but all the legislators in the Cape delegation. And so those are conversations that we've been having, and I will be meeting actually with Congressman Keating's office about 2 hours from now to talk about what federal resources are available for the towns of Yarmouth and Dennis and certainly Brewster too. Last year, the city of Boston received a 35% increase in what's called the EEC reimbursement rate, which is the Early Education and Care reimbursement rate. And what that is a direct payment to child care facilities for their staff and programming. The rest of the Commonwealth, particularly the Cape and other parts of the Commonwealth, only got a 2% increase. And so myself and 6 other representatives wrote a letter to House Ways and Means this session asking for an increase in that line item so that the rest of the Commonwealth can receive an increase, Cape Cod and other parts of the Commonwealth. And the House budget did pass a $10 million increase. We did ask for $20 million, which would have gotten us to the 35% increase, because it's really a matter of regional equity. But we got $10 million, which I think is a big victory, and I'm hoping that that line item will stay in the Senate's budget. We'll see what the Senate will do. They're going to be taking it up this month. And then depending on how much is changed, it might go to conference committee in June, but we'll have a new budget definitely by July.
Speaking of budget, I think you guys just passed the House budget last month.
We did.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yep,
And,
absolutely. So a few weeks ago, the House passed the budget. Some key takeaways in that were fully funding school meals throughout the Commonwealth. Certainly, I serve on the Labor and Workforce Development Committee, and so we really focused on funding workforce development programs, particularly because our economy, particularly through COVID, and now that we're kind of in a post-COVID world, our economy is still fragile, and so I think we're trying to be as proactive as humanly possible to create and incentivize and help businesses, particularly small businesses, with their own workforce efforts, so that if depending on what happens with the economy, both at the Commonwealth level and certainly nationwide, we're really focused on making sure that people have jobs and access to employment, and that we're a partner to small businesses. And then there are a few other, there was large increases to arts and culture and housing. I would go over the details with you about them, but a lot of this might change since the Senate will be reviewing the budget and making its own recommendation. So, but I think I'll leave it at that.
with the Senate still having to go through and finalize it, what are a couple of the line items that you would say that you're hopeful will get through the Senate and might not be a sure thing?
So there was a circuit breaker, a fairly sizable increase for special education and also regional transportation for schools, and particularly for Dennis and Yarmouth, whether we're talking about the DY school district or we're talking about Cape Cod Tech, which is also a regional school in the district. Paying for transportation is very expensive, and so I'm hopeful that the increase that we allotted to that in the House budget remains. Certainly the special education circuit breaker, there are within, whether it's DY, Cape Cod Tech, or NOSIT, there are many students with a diversity of needs, and so and which can be costly. And so trying to be able to fund schools as much as possible and provide as much local aid from the Commonwealth as possible has really been a focus of the House's budget, and I'm certainly hopeful that will remain in the Senate's budget.
Awesome. Another kind of off the cuff question here. I noted we were at the legislative breakfast last week in Yarmouth at Red Jacket.
Yeah, it was great to see you there.
One thing that I noticed that's I feel like might be, I don't know if it's just the Cape or not, but like the Cape Cod delegate, even being from different sides of the aisle, seems like a really tight group. I feel like that's not common everywhere, and that's something that's really working in favor of the Cape and Islands.
So I'm so glad that you raised this as a point and for giving me the opportunity to chat about this, especially as the newest addition to the Cape delegation. I have to tell you, every single one of my colleagues has been unbelievably supportive of me and available if I have questions. And I think it's true when I've heard folks say in the past, and now that I'm on the other side of it, I can definitely attest that it is true that for Cape Cod, there's no Republicans and Democrats in the delegation. It's really, we belong to the Cape Party, and so many of our issues are similar. And I think that, for us to be able to advocate for resources and to deliver them back to our region, we're able to do that in an effective way because we work together. And I wish that we could see that more nationally, right? But certainly it's very bipartisan. Steve Zaros, the rep from the 5th Barnstable District, he was right there when I actually first came into the building when I was sworn in. He was standing right outside and welcomed me. And then David Vieira, a state representative, I want to say from the 3rd Barnstable District, both of whom are Republicans, he actually took me out to lunch after swearing in day. So I say all that to say that there's a real camaraderie, and it's very real. And certainly our state senator Julian Sear has been a great partner. We work very closely together. And then Leader Peak from Provincetown, she has been just a wealth of information and a great resource, particularly for me on the House side. So,
is there anything that you wanted to wrap up with?
So I think I kind of touched upon this, but I want to talk about it a little bit more, and that's around wastewater. Mm-hmm. So certainly in Dennis and in Yarmouth, those are going to be 2 expensive projects. I think for me and the delegation, we're really focused on getting as many resources to help them pay for that, and certainly this legislative session, I filed a piece of legislation that really codified letters that were sent from the Dennis Select Board, from the Yarmouth Select Board, and other municipalities across the Cape around concerns over the new Title V regulations, which have not been enacted. We don't know what they will look like just yet. But, whether, being a Select Board member trying to get wastewater infrastructure, into Dennis or for Yarmouth, I understand the anxieties around, how are we able to pay for this? And with the new Title V regulations, for instance, Dennis and Yarmouth both have comprehensive wastewater management plans, CWMPs, and they were approved by Mass DEP. And those plans, charted out what it would look like to actually implement the infrastructure over a 40-year time frame. Mm-hmm. Well, these new regulations actually cut that time frame in half to 20 years, which is significant, right? And so we want to make sure that if there are changes, right, for municipalities, that they're not unfunded mandates, right? That we want to make sure that if there are changes, that there are resources provided that help the municipalities with those changes in the regulations. With municipalities, and I saw this being a Select Board member in Dennis, and I wanted to change this law for municipalities to help them. So with the police department, there's a statute in place that requires municipalities to only hire police officers within a 15-mile radius, which is hard when you are a police department trying to hire, entry-level police officers to work on Cape Cod and be able to afford either to buy a house or to rent. And so I filed a bill this session that would actually expand that to 40 miles, to a 40-mile radius, which I think really benefits not just, Dennis or Yarmouth, but really Cape Cod in general and other parts of the Commonwealth. And certainly for those police departments who want police officers to be a little bit more local than 40 miles away, closer to the 15, they can still stick to that. I mean, that can be an internal rule. But I wanted to work on that because as we've seen on Cape Cod and certainly on the islands, there are significant issues around recruiting and trying to get police officers and first responders to be able to live and work on the Cape. And then while we're kind of talking about housing and the cost of housing, I filed a bill this session too that would incentivize and provide tax incentives for the redevelopment of structures. So for instance, I'll use the Wixon School or the Mattakees School. Both of those schools are going to be coming offline, and the towns will be figuring out, what will become of the properties. And so, this bill could incentivize the redevelopment of those schools for housing, or, if there are plenty of churches that have come on the market on Cape Cod, that bill would incentivize the redevelopment of those structures. And certainly, if you go along 28 or even 6A, there are some old plazas or hotels that could be converted. And so that bill really takes aim to redevelop it into multifamily housing so that we can have a little bit more of a diversified housing stock on Cape Cod. As you know, there's very little land left to develop, and also there 80% of our current housing stock is single-family homes, which multifamily housing is really needed to help offset that, so that young people, young professionals, seniors have a place to call home, and because there are so many people who are either overhoused or underhoused or not housed at all and have to move. So that's really been a big focus of mine too, is to be able to develop housing and offer municipalities the tools to help with multifamily housing development.
Representative Flanagan, thank you so much for sitting down with us today. Is there anything else you want to say to your constituents?
Well, Mitch, first of all, thank you so much for having me on today. I'm a huge supporter of Cape Media and love the work that you all do. And really just a thank you to the towns of Dennis and Yarmouth and Brewster for electing me. I've tried to hit the ground running and have loved every moment of it, and I'm really just grateful to have the opportunity to serve. So thank you very much again for the opportunity, Mitch, and it's great to be here with you.